What's up, everybody? Welcome to the State of Wild, episode 146, the regular YouTube video web series podcast thingy. My name is Meowth, and as usual, I'm joined by my two good friends and co-hosts, Roffle and Corbett. Guys, we just had a whole bunch of news come out this week. Kind of huge news, kind of related to some wild specific content. Are you guys ready to talk about it?
Yeah. Once again, Wild is saved. Twist is saved. We are the the first and only Twist podcast, as well as the first and not the first. We are the only Wild podcast as well. Clearly, so I'm glad you're here.
Yeah, there's so much to get into. I don't even know where to start unpacking my feelings on everything, but that's what today's for. Today, is kind of going through the many complicated emotions that I'm feeling with the announcement of all this kind of stuff. I don't know, big news. We had the awesome interview earlier with Chad and Matt. So that was really cool. Make sure you guys go check that out if you do want to know more about what's going on with all these changes. But yeah, this is full on. Wild is saved. Wild 2.0 has finally arrived.
Yeah, so we're going to have a little bit of a therapy / venting / live react content episode here, because we're kind of still just processing everything that's happened. So again, we had an episode with the devs that Corb just talked about. You guys should check that out if you guys haven't already, kind of diving into a lot of the changes. If you guys haven't seen the changes, make sure you guys check out those patch notes. Again, I'll link them down in the description. It's a lot. It's not going to be a quick read. You're going to need a little bit of time to work your way through these patch notes. But yeah, let's just start trying to digest everything. So I mean, let's start big. Twist, the new format's been announced, right? So we have Wonders, which is kind of the name, right? New Ages was kind of everything from Ashes of Atlan forward. For Twist, we're kind of going the opposite. We're going classic up until Mean Streets of Gadgetzan. That means no Death Knight, no Demon Hunter, the OG 9 classes, kind of OG Wild, not Wild, kind of OG Hearthstone is what it feels like, right? So just genuine, like the first season, there are no other rules, right? There's no neutrals rules or anything like that. Kind of just as a Twist format. How are we feeling?
I think this is what a lot of people wanted from the Twist format, as well as what people wanted from the classic format, is a place to relive a little bit more of the nostalgia. It's hard to pack in too much excitement or nostalgia into something it's relatively bland as classic, right? You don't get a whole lot of new mechanics. You don't get a lot of interesting cards that are honestly playable. Like it's pretty dull. So I think that this is more in line with what people wanted out of both formats. I think it's why the Twist format was probably introduced in large part, and quite honestly, it's what I wish the first Twist season were. I think that would have made a much bigger splash for a brand new format, and probably wouldn't have turned nearly as many people away from the start. So hopefully this can help recover sort of the image of Twist from what it was prior to with the new age couple months. And I think that these are, especially things like Whispers of the Old Gods, the League of Explorers, and even Mean Streets of Gadgetzan are something that maybe people didn't necessarily like a whole lot at the time, but they certainly do look back fondly on these. And I think that there are some interesting things that you can do within these sets. It's like it's Wild before Wild existed, essentially.
Yeah, Gadgetzan was really my first big dive into the more competitive side of Hearthstone. It was the first time where I queued into someone named Dog, and that was very exciting. So I definitely have a lot of fondness for this time period of Hearthstone. That said, like if they had just brought back the format with no other real changes, sort of made it like a classic-esque go around where it was just gadgets and nothing else, I wouldn't be nearly as sort of interested, because I think that nostalgia marks masks a lot of problems that people have, right? Like it's so easy to look back on something with those rose tinted goggles and kind of just forget about some of the issues that plagued the format at the time. But that said, that's not what they're doing. They're packaging this time period with all these changes, like 100 over 100 changes, and that's what makes it so interesting. Is that the format will probably look quite a lot different than what we had at the time. Also because as far as we know, and I'm pretty sure I confirmed, it's not like Patches is going to have charge again. Like Patches got nerfed after Gadgetzan, but once we go back in time, he's not going to suddenly still have charge in that format as well. So that could definitely change the dynamic as well. So yeah, twist format. Again, I think Roffle hit on it where he said that maybe this would have been the more ideal starting point for Twist. But this is definitely kind of like Twist's a big arrival. This is kind of a reason why we had the quote unquote beta to start off with, and now this is sort of the big one that hopefully hooks a lot of people in, because I think that Twist for me should be on paper the more compelling format for my own enjoyment, but I need other people on board. Like I want to play it, I just don't want to play it with a 12-minute queue. So I need everyone to be excited about this, because this should be really fun. But hopefully they get it right when it comes to pricing and all that kind of stuff. There'll be more details on that in the future. We'll have to wait and see. But as long as there's a more frictionless, entry into the format for lots of players, I think it'll be really, really, really cool.
Yeah. A couple of things to touch on from everything you just said. They are going to be the cards that you see in Wild, right? So again, like you said, Patches is not going to have charge, but then stuff like Warsong Commander is going to be able to give patrons charge, and Frothing Berserkers charge, and those are going to exist in that format. So, things are going to appeal to different people, but it's going to be the same, right? You're not going to go back to Classic. We're going to have different versions of cards. It's going to be the versions of cards that exist today. And so even if you have this nostalgia factor kind of built into that time, it's going to be different, right? For majority reasons. Some of them are going to be cards have been nerfed, but then we're also getting, like you mentioned, 100 buffs or so, in addition to some new cards potentially. So it's going to be a completely different format than what you might remember from Each New Gadgetzan, because they kind of modernized the feel of Old Hearthstone, but it is still going to be Jades and Cthulhu and like stuff like that, which Patron Warrior, which hopefully is going to appeal to kind of that nostalgia factor that people were looking for from Classic.
Yeah, it's kind of funny when we had the last Twist format. I felt like it was actually fairly easy to go ahead and Theocraft, because the decks that we had were probably a lot more closely aligned to what we had in Wild or what we had seen recently. Like there's a lot more fresh memory of what stuff looks like. That's a lot more concrete. Whereas this, there's so much in the air, because it is kind of like we're doing the Gadgetzan thing, but I think in general, like whether it's a new card or whatever, people can get very anchored and tied to their initial impressions of a card. Like you see it all the time with card evaluations, Corridor Creeper being always the most infamous example. We saw similar mechanics and then we didn't evaluate that card properly. Well, the devs didn't either. Sorry, XR. But I think with this format as well, it might be easy to try and go back in time and look at what was strong and what wasn't playable. But there's so much that's probably up in the air. Like Theocrafting and all that kind of thing will be very complicated, and there'll be a lot of question marks and cards that you've never really thought about in a competitive sense. You're going to have to really try and reevaluate what you can do with some of this stuff, because a lot of cards went from 1-star to 5-star. So that really does flip the whole paradigm completely around.
Yeah, you also have to consider that like the player base is much different now compared to when these sets were actually like current within Hearthstone. This is around or near the height of Hearthstone popularity, and it's gained new players since then, but it's also lost a substantial amount. So like the sort of tribal knowledge or memory of what was going on at the time isn't necessarily there anymore. It has the potential to bring some of those people that we've lost over time back to Hearthstone as a result of that desire for a hit of nostalgia, and with an updated bit of power to maybe be a little bit more in line with modern Hearthstone, but not necessarily, at least within the twist format, at the same pace that we see certainly in Wild. It might be closer to in line with maybe a modern standard format, but just kind of the pace of, I guess, more modern pace of Hearthstone, which I think, at least for current players, is probably a good thing. I don't think that a lot of current players would want to go back to the pace of play that we saw in in this block as much as I would, and as much as I know a lot of like highly engaged, or at least a portion of highly engaged players would probably say that they want to. I don't think the majority of players necessarily want to go back to that time exactly. So I do like the idea of revisiting some of these sets and kind of giving them a bit of an update.
Yeah. All right. So I'm going to use that as the perfect transition point to kind of talk about Caverns of Time, because these do go hand in hand together. So what Caverns of Time is essentially a straight to wild expansion. But what I mean by that is, in order to help modernize this twist format, right, to modern Hearthstone, what they did was they went back and changed and buffed a lot of these old cards from these sets, right? Some of these cards that you look at now and you're like, how was that a card, right? This card never should have been printed that way. They kind of went back and changed that and fixed things and made things more up to speed. And so for the new twist format, players can buy packs of Caverns of Time to help them get the cards for this format. If you guys, again, are current WoW players, you already have access to some of the cards on this list that are getting buffed, you don't need to buy them again. They're there. They're going to be buffed. You're going to have access to play with them. But because they're buffing a bunch of these, Wild specific cards, what that is basically updating the versions of those cards in Wild. And so not only are we getting kind of buffed cards for Twist that are going to help modernize that format, you're getting a bunch of buffs to Wild specific cards that might help modernize these old archetypes and make them playable in the very powerful thing that is Wild. So I kind of want to start broad. Let's talk Caverns of Time. How are you guys feeling about this whole, buff a bunch of things for Twist that also impacts Wild, and they're kind of using it as a way to print cards directly into Wild, or buff cards to help our archetypes in Wild, or just maybe buff other cards that are already seeing play in Wild. We'll talk about that maybe a little bit later, but just kind of general as a product. How are you guys feeling about it?
As a product, it's something that I've advocated for quite a while. Especially, I don't think you explicitly addressed it, but we did, allude to it earlier. There are additionally new cards that are coming along with the Caverns of Time. In addition to the 100 or so buffs, there's a handful of just brand new cards that sort of fit the theme of the Caverns of Time block. I would imagine we don't have the details on those just yet, but like they're meant to go hand in hand with the twist format, which is that block of cards. So again, a straight to Wild set is something that I've been advocating on this very podcast for quite a while. So that part I'm very excited for. New cards are great. New cards that sort of give people an incentive to at least try out Wild. I know at first this will be sort of, most people will probably be getting the Caverns of Time packs in order to try out Twist. But if they like that format, they like some of the specific cards, maybe they'll stick around for Wild. So I think that's a good thing. Also, something that I've talked about on this podcast quite frequently is my feelings on buffs. I think that buffs are pretty risky, both because they could, first and foremost, further exasperate an already broken format in Wild and speed things up a little bit further. And then I think the side that people don't necessarily think about as often is there's also a risk in the buffs just do nothing, and that's time spent. Time is finite. The dev team only has so many members and only has so much time to spend on this type of thing. Like, time spent buffing cards that still see no play is not time well spent. So that's time that could have been spent, adding additional cards to that block of new cards rather than just updating old cards. That said, I think that this is one of the times where maybe the risk for the majority of the cards in this block, I think the risk of buffing them is relatively low because they have high nostalgia. Things like the old gods are, who cares if they're broken? They come down in the end game. That's fine. That's people are just happy to get to turn 8 through 10 in Wild these days. It's fine if the old gods are broken. And filling out some of those archetypes that were almost there and then just didn't quite get there. I think that's fine. I think doing that is low risk, especially in Twist, because even some of those underplayed cards are probably going to find some play. Now, in Wild, I think it's a different story, and we'll talk about some of the specifics of how I feel later. But in general, I am very positive about this, and I'm hopeful that it sets a precedent and is something that they'll do in the future for other Twist blocks.
Yeah, I am primarily viewing this as a Twist update, as a Twist product. I am not viewing it as something that is for Wild, which is kind of funny because that's not necessarily how it was framed in terms of the Wild Phase 2 at the very start of the year. It was very much marketed or suggested to be a real product for Wild, but that is not how I see it. I think that in terms of updating this era for Twist, the Gadsden era, going back and changing and pushing a whole bunch of different decks, I think that's really exciting. And like Roffle said, if they did this in the future with other older sets and archetypes, I don't think I would be opposed at all. Like, obviously, the more modern time period you look at, there's probably a smaller gap in terms of power level. And a lot of the time in the old sets, the very bottom 25% of the cards were much, much worse than the current bottom 25% of the cards. There's been a real squishing where they try not to print Worgen Greasers anymore unless they're updating a literal Worgen Greaser like they are this time. So I think that part is really awesome, and I'm very much looking forward to the Twist side of things. But like Roffle said, I have completely opposite, conflicting thoughts from the positive feelings I have about it for Twist compared to my negative feelings that I have for Wild and what this will potentially do for Wild. So we'll dig into the more specific stuff in a bit, but overall, that's pretty much it. I think it's cool for Twist. Makes sense. Big launch of the expansion. Hope that it is exciting for lots of people. And despite being marketed as a Wild perk, I don't really see it as being as such.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's not just a Wild thing that they're marketing it as, right? Like they're buffing a bunch of these cards for Twist, but these changes are also making a big impact on Wild, and so I don't know, maybe I'm not reading it the same as you guys are in terms of that. I'm reading this as they're making sweet changes for Twist, and the fact that they are also impacting Wild, is a bonus. But maybe I'm just like misreading into that.
I think some of that is the way that it was announced at the beginning of the year.
On the roadmap specifically, right?
On the roadmap specifically, as well as some of the conversations that were coming out of the Wild Summit. Like this seems to be the result of that, right? And I think what people were expecting was large scale nerfs, which, to be fair to the Hearthstone team, there was never any indication that was going to be the case. There was no reason for people to have that expectation, but that was the expectation that people came out of that with, because the conversations about the Wild Summit itself came from conversations and vocal community members speaking up about the problem of the balance within Wild. And so I think it's reasonable that they made that jump to, okay, well, they're going to revamp Wild and do some large scale balance changes, even though that was never explicitly stated nor kind of said. And I think what unfortunately ended up happening is, well, now we're going in the opposite direction, right?
They did make balance changes. This is true.
Right. Rather than making nerfs, they made buffs, which has the potential to further exacerbate some of the problems within the format. And so I think it's going to, like, to Corb's point, leave some of the wild players that maybe have no interest in Twist a little bit disappointed, potentially disgruntled.
Yeah. So I will say, yeah, the team didn't make any sort of indication that nerfs were something that were on their radar. And I think one of the things that I pulled out from the interview that we did with Chad and Matt was like Matt's comment about like this is what they want Wild to be, right? They want Wild to be this uber powerful, uber fast format where every mana crystal matters. And so like it sounds like, and again, I don't want to put words in any dev's mouths, but that to me that is kind of the conclusion that I came to with that comment that he made, right? And so I think expecting nerfs was not something that maybe should have been on our radar, but it also sounds kind of like that nerfs are something that maybe like mass scale nerfs maybe should be something that's shouldn't ever be on our radar.
Right, and to be fair, again with to the dev team, not only have they never said that nerfs are upcoming, but like I'm pretty sure that I've seen a tweet or an interview with Matt where he said something very similar in the past. It's been clear even before he took over as the modes designer that was their stance on Wild. They have taken a bit of a more active hand than they did in the past, but like all communication from the team has been essentially that. So I think it's fine to be disappointed that the changes aren't what you want. You know, I'm a little disappointed for the sake of Wild based on some of these changes, but like I also never had the expectation that they're going to be doing massive nerfs because of the words that they said. For the most part, the fact that they never said that, and the fact that they have been saying things essentially like what Matt said in the interview with regard to Wild for years now. So I don't know. I'm disappointed, but I'm not like surprised, I guess.
Yeah.
This is I mean, the product that we're being given here, it is exactly what Cora said at the start of the year. So right. I'm not remotely surprised either. Like she said, we'll be getting updated cards and some new cards. And the product is here, and we have updated cards and some new cards. And they even hit on the type of specific archetypes that I was expecting, with like, you know, Cthuns and Jades probably being some of the more obvious things that they're probably gonna want to modernize. I didn't know that it was obviously going to be bundled with this whole Twist idea, but the general buffs that they're pushing shouldn't be a shock at all, and the lack of widespread nerfs shouldn't be a shock at all either. I think that players should continue to become more comfortable with the idea that the very active balancing role that they might want from the dev team is never going to happen. They are fine with Wild being kind of the shit show format where the power level is super high. And you kind of just have to, I think, learn to live with it. It's something that I've had to kind of change, and my expectations and everything around the format have really gone through a big process over the last like 2 or 3 years or so, to the point now where I sort of saw the writing on the wall, and the whole Wild is Wild thing where the power level is absolutely absurd and it's not touching anything. This is what I expect. And in fact, I'm kind of advocating, you know what, screw it. At this point, it's just like revote other stuff that they've nerfed in the past. So my expectations are definitely realigned. And I think, I feel like I get the point of like, if these changes aren't what you want, then you should be disappointed, or that you're allowed to feel disappointed. But at this point, it does feel like, you know, how many times do you need to be told that this is what they're doing? They've never lied, really, about what your expectations should be. And so this needs to be constant realignment if you do find yourself expecting things that aren't going to be happening.
Right. Like, how many times have we had the same conversation on this on this podcast? It's I feel like we're kind of rehashing that, and we do it every single time balance changes comes out. Now that said, some of the specific choices I might have some so
we'll dive into those.
Some concerns about.
Yeah. I before we dive into those, I do want to just mention that, like, given the expectation of, like, when I saw Wild 2.0, I wasn't expecting large scale nerfs, right? Because of everything that we've just talked about. And so with that in mind, this product is exciting for me. I am an engaged WoW player. I'm also somebody who's going to play a lot of Twist just generally. So for me, I love this product. I'm excited for this product. I'm excited to see, potentially more things like it. Hopefully things in the future aren't going to include some of the changes to specific cards that we're going to talk about in like a couple of minutes here. But I just want to make sure that that's kind of out there for my thing of as a specific product for Twist and for Wild, whether it was marketed as that as not or not. I'm excited for it. I just want to make sure that I'm there.
Same, yeah,
I'm gonna pivot. I'm not excited for Wild specifically. For Twist, I'm excited.
Okay.
For Wild, I'm not.
Sure. I mean, even for Wild, I'm excited because these changes are, could set a precedent for something that they might revisit in the future. Do hit on a lot of people's favorite archetypes and favorite cards, so it gets closer to that idea of fantasy. A place where you can play your old cards. So I think that the majority of these are fine, and I like Corb. I like the idea of buffing Cthulhu. I like the idea of buffing Jades and kind of getting those more in line. It's just fundamentally, I don't think that if a card is currently seen play in a format as powerful and fast as Wild, that there is absolutely any reason for that card to be buffed. That card is
that doesn't make sense.
That card is fine, right? Clearly, if it's strong enough for Wild, it's strong enough, full stop. And so I don't know how to get past that part. And fortunately, that is the minority of these cards, but there are some in there where you're kind of left scratching your head that's a high win rate card in a tier 2 borderline tier 1 meta deck. Why are we buffing that?
Yeah, to be fair, in the interview, Matt also did say, because this is the first time that they're doing something like this, that they will be, keeping a close eye on cards and, make some changes if they need to. We've heard that before. So again, don't hold any breath, but I do suppose that they would be way more willing to make changes to buffed cards or even brand new cards if they end up being kind of busted. Much more than they'd be willing to make balance changes to kind of old, well, I guess I shouldn't say that because some of these are old cards, but to cards that exist, right, and that aren't part of this Caverns of Time product. All right, but we've been alluding to it, so let's start talking about some specific changes in the context of Wild, because again, we're not going to really know a lot about this Twist format just yet. Talking about Wild, there are a couple changes on here that have caught some eyes. Maybe have caught yours if you guys read the article before listening to the podcast. Some cards in fan favorite decks like Secret Mage, where Mana Worm is getting unnerfed to its OG form. We also have Cabal Crystal Runner, a card that sees plenty of play as one of the best cards in Secret Mage, getting buffed to a 6/5 instead of a 5/5. We also have, decks like Even Shaman, potentially. I don't even know this card's good enough, but it's getting help in something like Tuskar Totemic going back to 2 mana. We also have, some Discard Warlock buffs. So yeah, some of the choices. I guess we didn't even touch on Shadow Bomber and Aggro Priest. I know that's a deck that everybody likes, getting buffed to a 3/1. Yeah, guys, a lot of changes here. You guys want to start on the things that you're not kind of shaking your head up before we get to some of the ones that you're maybe a little bit happy about?
I mean, yeah, I feel like in general, my point remains. If a card is seen playing Wild, there's no reason to buff it. It doesn't as soon as it crosses a very modest threshold of it is seen play in a percentage of decks that registers anywhere. That is a strong enough card and does not need to be buffed. I think that Shadow Bomber, Cabal Crystal Runner especially fall into that. But even like you said, cards maybe a Tiny Knight of Evil or a Silverware Golem, where in the not too distant past those were seen play already. And those are already included in a fringe playable archetype and in one that was just flat out broken after the introduction of a essentially a single new card. So those are already Wild playable cards. They do not need to be buffed. So it's just I don't know, that I get that the changes were made primarily for Twist, but the consequences of those changes continue in Wild after this Twist format is gone, and that feels pretty bad as a wild player, especially when not every twist format is going to be of interest to me. So I'm just now stuck with these changes, and I'm going to be seeing more Secret Mage and potentially more even common. I don't think that's actually possible. So it's like it it's a bummer, man. Like that's really what it comes down to. It feels like um, it could have, even just from an optics perspective, this could have been such a big win. You're buffing Cthulhu. Everybody loves Cthulhu. You're including new cards that are wild only and are going to like not be holden to the balance whims of standard. And then there's just these like few errant changes that are just like, I don't know. It's going to rub a lot of people the wrong way, and they're going to be dismissive of the entire thing as a result of some of these like just needless buffs. I think is what it comes down to. Because again, cards playable in Wild. It's a good enough card.
Yeah. Wild's power level right now is so high, right? Like the threshold is so extreme. And I mentioned that for a couple things. The like Cthulhu buffs and Jade buffs, right? They make up a very big bulk of the changes, and those are effectively going to be invisible, I assume, to me at least. Like I'm sure that there, and I don't want to dismiss this section of the player base. There are going to be lots of players, you know, maybe like more casual Wild players. You might just play in silver or gold, like whatever. They like to play their Cthulhu deck. They like to play their Jade deck. They experience the game in a very different way than I do, and that's fine. They might get a real kick out of this, and so I want to first note that as a positive, sure. But when talking about my experience and talking about the experience that I have and the experience that players who engage with me in Twitch chat, Twitter, Reddit, whatever, what experience they have, those cards do not do anything, right? Like Roffle said, buffs have a risk where they do nothing. And I hate to break the news, but Arya getting one attack, we're not playing Arya, all right? Like that's not the deal breaker right there. And so that's one big section of the changes. The next section of changes that I like are changes that I think are really cool if the year was 2021. I'm looking at things like Ball of Spiders, right? Like Ball of Spiders at 3 mana, that's actually like a pretty decent card, you know, like that's a neat thing where if you splash it into standard today, that might be really cool. Some of the Beast Druid buffs as well, you know, like the Addled Grizzly now being a 2 mana 2/3 after you summon a beast, give it +1/+1. Like that's pretty cool. I want to play that with bees, and I want to play Knight of the Wild now that it's like in line with Matriarch. Like I think that stuff's really cool. But a deck like Beast Druid has been completely power crept. It's gone. It's over. Like we can't play that anymore. It's done. Now we have mechs and Vomit with Even Shaman and OTKs, and it's over. Like you can't play those cards competitively. So then we're left with the Roffle changes that he outlined, which is the stuff that is already top tier, the stuff that will be top tier, the stuff that is very spooky for the future. And that is the thing that is going to affect the Wild format. Because of course it is. Why would the cream of the crop not be the thing that everyone does? And most often when the expansion comes out, there are really only about 10 to 15 relevant Wild changes or Wild new cards. And that's what is going to happen here. The specific changes are silly, I think. Shadow Bomber being a 3/1, dumb. Like, why? It's already a good card. I get it that, again, that we're pushing this for Twist, where Aggro Priest wasn't really an archetype in that era. But again, we are living with this forever now, because the window for changes in Wild are very, very tiny, and it's more likely than not that they will not change something once it is already in Wild, if it misses that like the first 2 to 3 week period of time where they would change it. So Secret Mage getting another premium 1-drop. Mana Worm, great. Now Secret Mage has 3 like really, really busted 1-drops. Tiny Knight of Evil, you know, like we just saw it with Tome Tampering. It could very easily become a very oppressive card in the future. And, you know, discard support is constantly coming. So, you know, that could be a re-emerging archetype that I'm not really excited to see. So, yeah, basically, format power level is already too high for my sake right now. I think everyone has a threshold that they're okay with. it's already like breaking past mine, where I'm not really comfortable and having fun in a lot of the games that I play against mech decks and stuff. And this sort of just accelerates that, where like multiple fairly high tier archetypes kind of got a boost, and the majority of archetypes don't really get a new avenue that I would have tried because the power level's so high anyway. So I'm generally probably against the idea of big buffs to wild sets fundamentally, for both game balancing reasons and also because it sort of interferes with the core concept of an eternal format a little bit to me. But I think that, again, the specific changes that were chosen are probably going to leave a terrible, terrible taste in people's mouths, myself included.
Yeah. I will say, I want to echo the first thing that you started with before you dove into all of that, of like 99% of these changes are going to be great for the casual player base. The players that want to play like Secret Paladin, the players that want to play Dragons or Death Rattles or Cthulhu or Jades or things like that. For 99% of the population, this is going to be a great product. And it's going to be a great product for Twist, but for the 1% at the highest levels of Wild, and then eventually, once things trickle down to the diamond ranks as well, I do echo the same sentiment of, it does feel like some of these cards should not have been picked. I echo a lot of the same things that you guys are saying, of like, if a card is seen playing in Wild and is seeing play in Wild, like one or the other probably shouldn't be buffed, right? Because it's not like that card is the reason that deck is not seeing play. And so I am a little bit scared of a couple of these changes as well. Things like Mana Worm, things like I don't understand the Crystal Runner change of all things. That's the one that's maybe the most confusing.
I think
we haven't even talked about Small Time Buck coming back.
Yeah.
Pirate decks needed the buff, you know. Okay, low-key, Pirate Rogue has been falling off, but like, I don't know that that's something that we need to buff, because the moment you print another good one drop, we're back to top tier status. I don't know. Bigger picture, I do like changes like these, but I want more of my changes to be the Acid Mod Dread Scale changes, and I want more of my changes to be Into the Colosseum style of changes, and less Crystal Runner, Mana Worm. Okay, low-key Flame Leviathan. This card's just kind of busted in Mech Mage now. I don't know if we've talked about that. If you guys don't remember it, it's probably for a good reason, because the card was unplayable. But now it's a 7-mana 7/7 that has Rush just on its own, and when you draw it, it just deals 2 damage to everything that's not a mech. So Mech Mage gets another board clear. It's just things like that, right? Like, cards that support archetypes that are already like top tier are interesting changes. Maybe they're seeing things far in the future. I like the other scale of changes, but the default ones were very interesting to me, as the reasons that they picked those cards. And Corb kind of alluded to this, where like it's felt like for the past like 2 or 3 years, the number of non-games where like one player doesn't really get to make many, if any, decisions in Wild has been kind of going up, right? And now we're kind of at mechs and totems and OTKs and then like tech piles, where the Reno player gets to play the game, but the player that's like on the other side of it doesn't really get to, right? Because all their cards cost like 17 mana for the entire game. Like, that feels like it's been going up. And since it hasn't been something that they've addressed, a lot of these cards probably aren't going to see play as a result of that. I feel like if they had been more... we keep coming back to this conversations, and I feel kind of bad doing that. But, you know, if we had been more liberal, right, with those changes, maybe something like Mysterious Challenge going to 5 mana 5/5 would be like super exciting, right? It might actually bring about a new archetype. But I do kind of echo Corp with like, do you guys really see any new things coming out from any of these cards? Or do you just see like Mana Worm maybe getting slotted into something like Secret Mage?
Yeah, I think it's mostly just going to be the former. I think that the hardest one for me to get over to is the Cabal Crystal Runner to 6 attack, and I think that's going to be the even if it's not the most like impactful change from an optics perspective, that's just going to be the one that's going to that a lot of people are going to fixate on, and is going to be very much disliked, because it's like already it's a deck that is hated more than its power level would generally warrant. But then you're making it stronger again when it's, it keeps getting those random buffs or introduction of new cards that make the deck stronger. So even if it's not the strongest change, I think that's going to be the least popular change coming out of the announcement. But yeah, I think for the most part, we're going to see likely what we see out of any expansion, but on a more focused sort of frame here because let's be real, a lot of these cards need a lot bigger a bump than just a mana or a stat line change in order to see play in our format. Like there are some cards that I really like playing that are going to get kind of decent makeovers, but like that's not going to make anybody else play them. Like Confessor Paletress does something when you play her now, but she still costs 7 mana, so nobody's going to play her except for me and that random opponent that I queue into every hour or so that's that sniped me with a goofy deck.
Yeah, and again, this kind of goes back to the idea of like, do you ever even do buffs to wild? Because to me, I just don't think there's really upside when the format is this high powered and you're kind of letting the eternal format thing write itself out. I just don't think there's real upside because it's like, what stat change do you need to put on a card like I don't know, Disciple of Cthulhu, because it's like it's a 3-mana 2/2 deal 2 damage now, and it's like, well, I mean, what did we need to do to make that relevant in the format where we are buffing Cabal Crystal Runner and Mana Worm and Small Time Buck? And I don't think there's an actual answer that makes sense, which is why I'm anti kind of a big buff to old cards like this when it comes to wild. Again, I do want to pivot back that I am excited for these changes for Twist, and that is how I primarily view the product that they're putting out. So in that sense, I don't want to be a downer about it too much, but I do think like I'm generally losing more and more interest in Wild, and it's sort of an inevitable thing is that everyone kind of has their own threshold for what they're okay with, and I'm definitely have been pushing mine for a while, and it seems like every set we're getting closer and closer. I'm just like, this is just not as interesting as it once was. Because like I said, cards like the Beast Druid changes, God, they do seem really cool on paper, but they're just not, I don't think they're going to be able to live up to everything else that's happening right now. You know, like Meowth mentioned, I think the Dreadscale Acid Maw cards, and it's like, yeah, it's neat. Just don't think it's gonna do anything. So we'll see. Like I think that no matter how, like, if you were gonna do buffs, right, you have to be very, very particular. And I am very concerned about the reaction. And then subsequently whether they look at doing this kind of stuff again for future Twist formats as well. But that's a long time down the road. Maybe that's not even something they were ever considering in the first place. But yeah, it is kind of just interesting how we've kind of wrapped up the whole. This is it. This is the Wild 2.0. This is the Phase 2 Wild change that we got. And then the big picture next to it is Cabal Crystal Runner as a 6/5.
Yeah, I will say I want to make sure that we are driving home this point of. I think all three of us absolutely love this product for Twists. And we're just not happy with kind of the side effects that we're going to be getting in Wild. And I'm going to go even a little bit further of like, I would even say that I love like 98, 99% of this product for Wild, right?
But why?
It's just like the 4 or 5 cards. Well, I mean, I just think
why do you love it when they?
Well, when 95% of the players that play Wild are casual players that want to play stuff like Jades or Secret Paladin or things like that, this is a huge boon, right? I think it's important to note that we are like in the 1% of like the competitive Wild players. And for us, like, we despise, hey, even you, Roffle, you're in the 1%, whether you like to admit it or not. And for us, yeah, like, we are going to hate seeing Mana Worm, Crystal Runner, and things like that. But I think for the majority of people, right, okay, they're more excited for something like Mysterious Challenger going to 5. They're really excited for cards like that. They're really excited to play Cthulhu and not just be absolutely terrible, right? And I think anybody that's a casual player, like, they're going to accept the fact that they're not playing the best decks, right? I will say that, like, the 2% of changes, like the Mana Worm, the Crystal Runner, the Small Time Buck, the discard spell, like the things that we've been talking about, I think those, like you said, are going to be the bad taste that everybody's going to have. But I think for the majority of the casual player base, which I think is important to make sure that we're, like, acknowledging them, right? Like, that's probably who they're making this product for the majority of these players. Because those are probably, honestly, the majority of WoW players are super casual players. this product is probably still going to be a home run. But I will say that like the high level for us, that we see even Shaman, we see Secret Mage, we see these decks 24/7. These are not like, those are the changes that we're honing in on. Whereas other players are probably honing in on Acid Maw Dreadscale. They're honing in on the new Malorn, and they're like, oh, they're honing in on Aviana going back to 9, and they're like super excited for that. And so I think it's important to make sure that we're noting that. I just think that when they were going through and making these 100+ changes, like, did we really have to buff Crystal Runner, right? When it was seeing play, like, we could have buffed the 4-mana 3/3, right? That grows.
Well, again, it goes back to the fact that this is a twist product, right?
Yeah,
So it's like,
I agree with that.
Do we have to change Crystal Runner? It's like, probably. Like, I haven't gone back and looked at the card pool. Maybe it makes a ton of sense for the archetypes that they're pushing in Twist.
But there's other secret cards that got pushed, right? Like, or printed at that time. Like, I remember we used to play like the 4-mana 3/3 that would grow if you had a secret at the end of the turn. Like, that's something that you could have buffed without like negatively impacting Wild Secret Mage, and things like that. So like, those are the kind of the decisions that I'm a little bit like, okay, we didn't really have to do that. And I feel like there's like, maybe 10 of those cards, but the other like 100+ changes, I think they're exactly what a product like this should be. I also want to make sure that we just point out, we also haven't seen the new cards. And so maybe the new cards that are getting printed are going to push new archetypes and things like that. So just want to make sure that we put that out there. We don't know what they're doing with the new cards, right? So
one thing I would, because I generally do agree. I think my take is somewhere in between the two of you. I'm the enlightened centrist here. But like I think the problem with, yes, most of the cards that are being buffed are casual appealing. As somebody who maybe's content caters to that casual audience and interacts with them on a regular basis, they still queue into Secret Mage. They still queue into Pirate Rogue. So yeah, they might be happy that their card's getting buffed, but they're going to be real mad that their buff cards are still not playable as a result of running into those decks all the time. So it's like, the stronger things are going to inevitably become the more prominent things. So what they're going to be seeing is the things that they were already seeing, just better versions of them as a result of that. So I think even from a casual perspective, there's going to be some disappointment here, because like, who cares if your Cthulhu costs 8 mana if it still gets hit by the objection that your 7th straight Secret Mage opponent has played.
Yeah, I mean, that's a fair point. I don't really know what people are playing at those ranks, right? Like the silver player that wants to play Cthulhu's. I mean, I guess like how much Secret Mage is there, but I can't really speak to that. But yeah, I don't know. Again, I just want to make sure that we circle back around. Twist product, great. I'm excited to play this Twist format. I'm really excited to do that. We'll probably again be talking about it on the podcast. We did just have kind of like when we saw the list of cards that were getting changed, we did have a pretty visceral reaction to a couple of these when we were reading through them. I remember that reaction, and you guys heard it here too. But yeah, any last comments you guys want to make on the product, Caverns of Time, or the new Twist format?
I think the last thing I'll say is that the reason I think maybe I'm most disappointed is because I'm kind of anticipating the community reaction to this that could result in maybe this type of thing not happening again. And I want this type of thing to happen again, just not with certain specifics associated with it. Like, I want straight to wild sets. I don't want
straight to wild sets that include buffing Crystal Runner.
Yeah, not even that, but I don't want like them, because this one maybe wasn't perfect, to be discouraged to the point, or like maybe the set flops as a result of that. And the same, I feel very similarly about this to how I felt about the New Age announcement, where I'm like, this could be so great. This is everything that like a lot of people have asked for, but not quite like this. And I worry that because of that not quite like this, that it's going to turn a lot of people off, disinterest a lot of people, and as a result, it's maybe not going to happen again. And I want it to happen again.
Yeah, it does feel like they keep getting like 99% of the way there, and then drop the ball on that like a few last little details that might hinder the product. I don't know what's gonna happen. We'll see when the product goes live. But yeah, Any last comments? You guys good? All right.
No, I think I've talked enough. I think I've said everything.
All right, but that being said, guys, thanks for joining me on the couple of last minute urgent podcasts that we had to record this week, with all the news that was coming out. So appreciate you guys sticking with me. Hope you guys are enjoying Wild. I know we haven't talked about anything specifically related to Wild this week, but hope you guys are enjoying it. Hope you guys are enjoying the streaming and all that stuff. Let the people know where they can find you guys and your upcoming Twist and Wild content.
Yeah, you can find me probably for the next week or so trying to cram some of these 98% of changes that no one else wants to play into my decks on Twitch at Roffle and YouTube at Roffle.
And you can find me at Corbett on Twitch or Corbettgames on YouTube and Twitter. Never calling it X. Sorry.
You learned your lesson from last couple episodes. Yeah. You guys can find me at GetMeowth on all the platforms. Appreciate you guys tuning in week after week. Hopefully you guys enjoyed the dev interview again. Check that out if you guys haven't already. It was an honor to do that. Make sure you guys check out that episode. But we appreciate y'all, and we will see you guys again next time. Later.